When we talk about ancient civilizations, we often start with ancient Egypt. This incredible society emerged along the banks of the Nile River in northeastern Africa. The Nile is an unusual river because it flows north, emptying into the vast Mediterranean Sea. For over 3 millennia, that's 3,000 years, Egypt was a powerhouse of culture, power, and engineering. To understand them, we have to grasp 3 core concepts: the role of the river, the power of their god-kings called pharaohs, and the purpose behind their massive monuments, the pyramids. A Greek historian, Herodotus, once called Egypt the gift of the Nile, and it's true. The entire civilization would not have existed without this one river. Imagine living in a vast, hot desert. The Nile provided the only reliable source of fresh water for drinking and bathing. More than that, it was the main transportation highway. People and goods traveled easily up and down the country by boat. The river was their world, their water source, and their primary means of connection. What made the Nile truly special was its predictable flood cycle. Every summer, heavy rains far to the south would cause the river to swell and gently flood its banks. When the water receded, it left behind a layer of incredibly rich, fertile black mud called silt. This silt was a natural fertilizer. Farmers simply had to plant their seeds in the dark, rich, black land and watch them grow. This reliable cycle of flooding meant the Egyptians could plan their entire lives and calendar around the river. The geography of Egypt created a very concentrated civilization. The rich, arable land, the Black Land, was only a very narrow strip, maybe a few miles wide, right along the river. Immediately beyond that was the unforgiving, empty desert, the Red Land. Because the living space was so limited, everyone settled close to the Nile. This concentration of people along a single river helped them stay united politically. They all depended on the same water source, which made it easier for a single ruler to control them. While the flood was generally helpful, the Egyptians still had to manage the water. They were brilliant engineers who quickly developed irrigation systems. They dug thousands of canals and ditches to direct the floodwaters to fields farther away from the river, and to store it for the dry months. Organizing this massive community effort, telling everyone when to dig, where to build a dike, and how to share the water, required a powerful central government. This collective need for water management helped solidify the rule of the early leaders. Initially, Egypt was divided into 2 distinct regions: Upper Egypt in the south, closer to the Nile source, or upriver, and Lower Egypt in the north, the delta where the river spreads out. Around 3100 BCE, a powerful leader named King Menes united the 2 under a single crown. This unification was a pivotal moment. It brought stability and established the tradition of a single ruler overseeing the entire length of the fertile Nile Valley, setting the stage for the powerful dynasties that followed. The ruler of this unified land was the pharaoh. Unlike kings in many other cultures, the pharaoh was not just a political leader. He was believed to be a god on earth. This divine status gave him absolute and total authority. The people didn't question the pharaoh's power because he was seen as the intermediary between the gods and the Egyptian people. He owned all the land, controlled all the resources, and his word was literally law. Egyptian society was structured like a solid, unmoving pyramid. At the very top, of course, was the pharaoh and his family. Right below them were the elite, the powerful priests and the wealthy government officials, like the vizier and the scribes, who helped run the empire. Further down were skilled soldiers and artisans, but the vast base of the pyramid, the biggest part, was made up of the farmers who worked the land and, sadly, slaves. There was very little opportunity to move up this strict social ladder. The Egyptians were a deeply religious people who worshipped many gods, which is called polytheism. Their most important gods reflected the natural world, like Ra, the mighty sun god, and Osiris, the god of the dead and resurrection. Their religion was defined by one central belief, a strong faith in the afterlife, or a life after death. They believed that death was just a transition, and if the proper rituals were followed, they could live happily forever in the next world. This belief in the afterlife led to the invention of mummification. Egyptians believed that for the soul to live on, it had to be able to recognize and re-enter the body after death. Therefore, the body had to be preserved. Mummification was a complicated, months-long process of drying the body and wrapping it carefully in linen. It was a practice mainly reserved for the pharaohs and nobles, but it shows us just how important the preservation of the body was to their religion. Now we get to the pyramids. Why were these colossal structures built? They were not palaces or temples. They were massive tombs for the pharaohs of the Old Kingdom. The pharaohs planned these tombs from the moment they took the throne. The pyramid shape itself symbolized the pharaoh's journey to the afterlife, acting as a giant ramp or staircase to heaven. They were built to protect the pharaoh's preserved body and all the riches he would need for his life after death. The greatest of these structures is the Great Pyramid of Giza, built for the pharaoh Khufu over 4,500 years ago. At the time it was built, it was the tallest man-made structure in the world, standing over 480 feet high. Imagine the level of organization required. It took millions of huge, precisely cut stone blocks and decades of labor. The fact that the Egyptians could plan and complete a project of this scale shows us the immense, centralized power of the pharaohs. A common misconception is that the pyramids were built by slaves. Archaeological evidence actually suggests the labor was primarily done by tens of thousands of skilled Egyptian farmers and workers. This work was often organized during the 3 months of the year when the Nile was flooding and farming was impossible. The pharaoh's government organized this idle labor, paying the workers in food, like beer and bread, and housing them nearby. It was a national building project that unified the country. It's helpful to compare the Egyptian pyramids with the Mesopotamian ziggurats we discussed earlier. Both were massive, towering structures that demonstrated huge political power and required vast amounts of labor. However, their purpose was completely different. The pyramids were essentially giant, elaborate tombs focused on the afterlife. The ziggurats were temples and religious centers where people worshiped the gods in this life. The formal Egyptian writing system was called hieroglyphics, which literally means sacred carvings. It was a complex system that used pictures and symbols to represent both objects and sounds. They used hieroglyphics for important, permanent things, like carving religious spells on the walls of tombs and pyramids. Like the scribes in Mesopotamia, Egyptian scribes were highly valued for their ability to read and write these complex symbols. For everyday record-keeping, Egyptians turned to the papyrus plant, which grew abundantly along the Nile. They would process the plant's reeds, pressing and drying them into thin, flexible sheets. This papyrus was essentially the world's first true form of paper. Unlike the heavy, fragile clay tablets used in Mesopotamia, papyrus could be rolled into a scroll, making it much easier to write on, transport, and store. For many centuries, no one could read hieroglyphics. That changed in 1799 with the discovery of the Rosetta Stone. This stone contained the same decree written out 3 times, once in hieroglyphics, once in a simpler Egyptian script, and once in ancient Greek. Because scholars could read Greek, they used the Rosetta Stone as a key, finally unlocking the meaning of the ancient Egyptian language. This discovery allowed us to read the history of this incredible civilization for the first time. Building the pyramids and managing the Nile required advanced mathematics and science. Their architecture demanded expert knowledge of geometry, how to measure angles and calculate area. They developed an impressive 365-day solar calendar to accurately predict the annual Nile flood. Furthermore, the mummification process gave them a detailed knowledge of human anatomy, leading to advanced medical and surgical techniques for their time. By the time of the New Kingdom, a later period of Egyptian history, pyramids proved to be poor choices for a tomb. They were too obvious and were constantly robbed. To protect their pharaohs, they changed tactics. They began cutting secret, elaborate tombs deep into the rock walls of a remote area called the Valley of the Kings. This is where the famous, nearly untouched tomb of the boy king Tutankhamun was finally discovered in the 20th century. The story of ancient Egypt is a perfect example of how geography dictates destiny. The Nile provided the crucial resources and the unity for the entire civilization. This unified power gave the pharaohs the organization and labor to build their colossal tombs. Their profound belief in the afterlife dictated that those tombs be the eternal, permanent structure of the pyramid. Every major achievement, from their calendar to their geometry, was a direct result of their relationship with that one incredible river.